The heat in central Texas was oppressive that night, a thick, humid blanket that clung to the skin and smelled of asphalt and ozone. On the outskirts of San Antonio, where the city lights faded into the darkness of the hill country, stood the Iron Horse, a roadside bar that looked more like a bunker than a business. The gravel parking lot was packed with heavy cruisers, mostly Harleys, their chrome glinting under the singular buzzing floodlight. The air vibrated with the low rumble of idling engines and the shrill song of cicadas, creating a soundscape that warned casual travelers to keep driving. But Caleb didn't keep driving. He turned his pristine, overly polished bike into the lot, revving the engine unnecessarily loud, desperate to announce his arrival to a world that hadn't invited him. Caleb was 22, wearing a leather vest that was far too new and boots that hadn't yet seen a smudge of road grime. He killed the engine and sat there for a moment, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He checked his reflection in the rearview mirror, fixing a scowl onto his face that he hoped looked dangerous. He had spent his whole life feeling invisible, pushed around by bosses, dismissed by women, and ignored by his own family. Tonight, he had decided, that would change. He had convinced himself that respect was something you could take if you were loud enough, and he had chosen the most dangerous place in the county to prove it. He dismounted, his movements stiff and rehearsed, and walked toward the heavy steel door of the bar. The bass of a classic rock song thumped through the walls, mixing with the laughter of men who had known each other for decades. Caleb pushed the door open with a slam, stepping into the cool, smoke-filled air of the interior. The smell hit him instantly, a mix of stale beer, old leather, and unwashed denim. It was the scent of a brotherhood he didn't understand, but desperately wanted to mimic. He hooked his thumbs into his belt loops, widening his stance, trying to take up more space than he physically occupied. The bar was dimly lit, illuminated mostly by neon beer signs and the glow of the jukebox. Scattered around the room were men wearing the death head patch, Hell's Angels. They were not the movie characters Caleb had imagined. These were weathered men, their skin mapped with tattoos and scars, their eyes tired but sharp. As Caleb walked toward the bar, the conversation at the nearest tables died down. It wasn't a fearful silence. It was the quiet observation of a predator watching a confused animal wander into its den. Caleb felt the weight of their stares, dozens of eyes assessing his worth and finding it lacking, but he mistook their silence for intimidation. "Give me a whiskey, make it a double, and don't water it down," Caleb barked at the bartender, his voice cracking slightly before he found a deeper register. He slammed a $20 bill onto the sticky wood of the counter. The bartender, a heavy-set man with a grey beard, didn't flinch. He just poured the drink slowly, his eyes flicking briefly to a booth in the back corner of the room. Caleb grabbed the glass, downing half of it in a burn that made his eyes water, but he refused to cough. He turned around to face the room, leaning his elbows back on the bar, a smirk plastered on his face. Near the pool table, a biker was lining up a shot. He was a smaller guy compared to the giants around him, wearing a cut that looked like it had been through a war. This was Dutch. He was focused on his game, completely ignoring the loud kid at the bar. Caleb, feeling ignored and fueled by the alcohol hitting his empty stomach, decided that this man was the perfect target to establish his dominance. He pushed off the bar and sauntered over, intentionally walking into Dutch's personal space just as the man was drawing back his pool cue. "You're taking too long, old man," Caleb sneered, his voice echoing in the sudden lull of the music. "Some of us might want to play before the sun comes up." He stood too close, his breath smelling of cheap whiskey looming over the shorter biker. Dutch didn't look up. He stayed bent over the table, his eyes fixed on the cue ball. The disrespect of being ignored made Caleb's blood boil. The insecurity he was trying to hide flared up into a hot, reckless anger. He needed a reaction. He needed to be seen. So Caleb did the unthinkable. He reached out and shoved Dutch's shoulder, hard enough to make the man stumble slightly and miss his shot. "I said move it," Caleb shouted, expecting a fight, expecting to throw the first punch. The sound of the pool cue clattering against the table was the only noise in the room. The music stopped. The laughter died instantly. Every single person in the bar froze. It wasn't the chaotic noise of a bar fight starting. It was a vacuum of sound. Caleb stood there, chest heaving, waiting for the brawl. But nobody moved. The air in the room suddenly felt very heavy, and for the first time, Caleb realized he had made a mistake that couldn't be fixed with an apology. The silence in the Iron Horse was absolute. It was the kind of silence that presses against your eardrums, heavy and suffocating. Caleb's hand was still raised slightly from the shove, but now it trembled. He looked around, expecting fists, expecting shouting, but there was only stillness. Dutch, the man he had shoved, slowly straightened up. He didn't turn around immediately. He calmly chalked his cue, placed it on the table, and then turned to face Caleb. His eyes were dead calm, void of anger, which was infinitely more terrifying than rage. He looked at Caleb like one looks at a flat tire, an annoyance, not a threat. From the dark corner booth that the bartender had looked at earlier, a shadow moved. The leather groaned as a massive figure stood up. This was Iron Mac, the president of the local chapter. He was a mountain of a man, standing 6'4", with a long white beard and arms as thick as tree trunks. He wore sunglasses even inside the dark bar, and his presence seemed to suck the oxygen out of the room. He didn't run over. He didn't shout. He simply walked out from behind the table, his heavy boots thudding rhythmically against the wooden floorboards, like the ticking of a doomsday clock. Caleb's bravado evaporated instantly. The whiskey turned to acid in his stomach. He took a half-step back, his boots scuffing the floor, a sound that seemed incredibly loud in the quiet room. He looked from Dutch to the approaching giant, his mind racing for an exit, but the path to the door was blocked by 3 other members who had quietly stood up from their stools. They weren't blocking him aggressively. They just stood there, arms crossed, waiting. The trap had closed, and Caleb was the only one who hadn't heard it snap shut until now. Mac reached the pool table. He didn't look at Dutch. He looked straight at Caleb. The president's face was unreadable, a mask of stone carved by decades of wind and violence. He stopped 2 feet from Caleb, invading his space with a dominance that made Caleb want to shrink into the floor. Mac reached out a hand. Caleb flinched, squeezing his eyes shut, expecting a fist to shatter his jaw. But the impact never came. Instead, he heard the scrape of wood against wood. When Caleb opened his eyes, Mac was holding a wooden chair that he had dragged from a nearby table. He spun it around and slammed it down in front of Caleb with a crack that made everyone jump, except the other bikers. "Sit," Mac said. His voice was a low gravel rumble, deep and resonant. It wasn't a request. It was a command given by a man who was used to being obeyed instantly. The simplicity of the order confused Caleb more than a punch would have. I don't want to sit, Caleb stammered, his voice high and thin. Mac didn't repeat himself. He just tilted his head slightly, his sunglasses reflecting Caleb's terrified face. The threat of violence hanging in the air was so potent it was almost physical. Caleb's knees gave out, and he collapsed onto the chair, his hands gripping his knees, his knuckles white. He felt like a child in the principal's office, stripped of all the tough guy armor he had worn just minutes ago. Mac grabbed another chair and sat opposite him, sitting backward with his arms resting on the backrest. He leaned in close, the smell of tobacco and old leather enveloping Caleb. "You walked in here making a lot of noise, son," Mac said softly. "You bought a shiny bike, put on a vest that smells like the store, and thought you could buy respect with a loud voice and a shove." Mac paused, letting the words sink in. "But you made a mistake. You confused fear with respect, and in this room, we don't do fear." Caleb tried to look away, but he couldn't. "If you want to be tough," Mac continued, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried across the silent room, "start by listening. You just shoved a man who killed 2 people in self-defense in the 90s and didn't lose a minute of sleep. And the only reason you're still breathing is because he respects me enough to wait for my order. Do you understand the position you're in?" The reality of the situation crashed down on Caleb. This wasn't a game. These weren't costumes. He nodded slowly, a lump in his throat making it impossible to speak. The humiliation was worse than a beating. If they had beaten him, Caleb could have gone home with bruises and a story about how he fought the Hells Angels. He could have been a victim or a martyr. But sitting there being lectured like a naughty child while 40 grown men watched in silence was a dismantling of his soul. Mac signaled to the bartender, who brought over a bottle of whiskey and 2 clean glasses. Mac poured a shot for himself and one for Caleb. "Drink," he ordered. Caleb obeyed, his hands shaking so badly the glass clicked against his teeth. "You think this life is about noise," Mac said, taking a slow sip. "You watch movies. You see the vests, the bikes, the freedom. You don't see the rain. You don't see the funerals. You don't see the brothers sitting in prison cells for things they didn't do, or things they did do to protect the club." Mac gestured around the room. Every man in here has lost something irreplaceable to be sitting where he is. A wife, a job, a leg, a soul. You walk in here with everything intact and try to act broken. It's insulting. Caleb felt a flash of defensive anger, a last vestige of his ego trying to survive. I have it hard too, he blurted out, interrupting the president. You don't know me. People don't respect me out there. The room gasped collectively. Interrupting Mac was a sin worse than the shove. Dutch, who was still standing by the pool table, took a step forward, his hand going to the knife on his belt. But Mac held up a hand, stopping Dutch in his tracks. Mac didn't get angry. He got curious. Is that right? Mac asked, his tone dangerously polite. People don't respect you, so you came here to find someone smaller than you to bully? That's how you get respect? Mac leaned forward, his face inches from Caleb's. Let me tell you about Dutch, the man you shoved. Dutch lost his daughter to leukemia 5 years ago. He spent every dime he had on her treatment. He lives in a trailer behind this bar because he sold his house to pay the bills. He doesn't talk much because he's got nothing left to say to the world. And you decided he was in your way. The words hit Caleb like physical blows. He looked over at Dutch. The small man wasn't looking at him with anger. He was looking at the floor, his expression tired and sorrowful. The caricature of the violent biker that Caleb had built in his head shattered. These weren't just thugs. They were men with histories, with tragedies. Caleb's shiny new leather vest suddenly felt heavy and hot, a costume that didn't fit. The air conditioning in the bar seemed to stop working. Sweat trickled down Caleb's back. The road exposes who you are, Mac continued, his voice relentless. It strips away the lies. Out there on the highway, when it's raining sideways and a truck runs you off the road, your loud mouth doesn't save you. Your attitude doesn't save you. Control saves you. Brotherhood saves you. Mac pointed a calloused finger at Caleb's chest. You have neither. You are a tourist in a war zone, and tourists get hurt. The pressure in Caleb's chest was becoming unbearable. He wanted to run, to burst through the doors and ride until the gas tank was empty, but he knew he couldn't leave. Not yet. Mac wasn't done. The president reached out and tapped the shiny chrome watch on Caleb's wrist. Expensive, Mac noted. You got money, but you're poor in everything that matters. You think you can buy your way into manhood? Why are you really here, boy? Mac asked, the question cutting deep. Don't give me the bullshit about liking bikes. Why did you walk through those doors tonight looking for a fight? The question hung in the air, demanding an answer that Caleb wasn't sure he was ready to give. The eyes of the entire club were on him, stripping him naked, waiting to see what lay beneath the fake armor. Caleb stared at the amber liquid in his glass. The vibration of the refrigerator hummed in the background, filling the silence. He tried to summon a lie, a tough answer, something about loving the outlaw lifestyle. But under Mac's hidden gaze behind those sunglasses, the lies died in his throat. His lower lip trembled. The adrenaline that had sustained him was gone, replaced by a crushing wave of shame. My dad left when I was 10, Caleb whispered. The words tumbled out before he could stop them. It was the first time he had said it aloud to anyone in years. He rode. He had a bike like yours. He just rode off one day. I thought if I... He choked on the words, unable to finish. He thought if he became like the men his father admired, maybe he would understand why he wasn't enough to make his father stay. Or maybe, if he became scary enough, the pain wouldn't be able to touch him anymore. The reaction in the room was subtle but palpable. Shoulders relaxed, arms uncrossed. The hostility shifted into something else, not quite acceptance, but recognition. Every man in that room knew what it felt like to have a hole inside them that they tried to fill with gasoline and noise. Mac didn't mock him. He didn't laugh. He took off his sunglasses for the first time, revealing piercing blue eyes, surrounded by deep crow's feet. So you're looking for a ghost, Mac said, his voice softer now, stripped of the command tone. And you thought acting like an asshole would summon him? Caleb wiped his eyes aggressively, angry at his own tears. I just wanted to stop feeling weak, he admitted, his voice breaking. I wanted people to look at me and see someone who matters, someone dangerous. Dangerous isn't strong, Mac corrected him sternly. A rabid dog is dangerous. We put rabid dogs down. Strong is control. Strong is knowing you can kill a man but choosing to help him up instead because he's not worth the prison time. Strong is taking the hit for a brother. Mac leaned back. You showed us weakness tonight, son. You showed us you have no control over yourself. A man with no control is a liability to everyone around him. This was the breaking point. The illusion of the cool biker Caleb wanted to be was completely destroyed. He was just a sad kid with daddy issues in a costume. He felt a profound urge to flee, to disappear. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly. "I'll go," Caleb said, looking at the floor. "I'm sorry. I'll just go." He turned toward the door, expecting them to let him leave, to laugh as he walked out. "Sit down," Mac barked. The authority was back. Caleb froze. "You don't get to walk in here, disrespect my club, spill your guts, and then run away. That's the coward's way out. You want to learn what this life is? You want to know what tough really is?" Mac pointed to the back of the bar where a mop and bucket sat in the corner. "You have a choice," Mac said, his eyes locking onto Caleb's. "You can walk out that door right now. If you do, don't ever come back. If I see you or that bike in this town again, we will have a very different conversation. Or you can stay. You can pick up that mop. You can clean the puke in the bathroom. You can empty the ashtrays. You can serve the drinks. You keep your mouth shut, your eyes open, and you learn." It was a crossroads, the easy way out, or the hard road through the humiliation. Caleb didn't leave. For the next 5 hours, the tough guy who had walked in demanding respect was on his knees scrubbing the floor of the men's bathroom. The smell was atrocious. Urine, disinfectant, and decades of grime. His expensive leather vest hung on a hook by the door, looking ridiculous and hollow. He was sweating through his t-shirt, his back aching, his hands raw from the chemicals. Every time a biker walked in to use the urinal, they ignored him completely, stepping over him as if he were a piece of furniture. The glamour of the biker life was entirely absent here. There was no wind in his hair, no freedom, just the humiliation of servitude. Outside, the Texas sky had opened up, a torrential downpour hammering against the metal roof of the bar. The thunder shook the walls, mirroring the turmoil inside Caleb. He felt anger, yes, but it was directed at himself now. He replayed the scene with Dutch over and over. How stupid he must have looked. How small. Around 2 a.m., Caleb was sweeping broken glass near the pool table. He was exhausted, his arms feeling like lead. He accidentally clipped a table leg with the broom, sending an empty beer bottle crashing to the floor. It shattered loudly. Caleb flinched, waiting for the yelling. He looked up to see Dutch standing there, the man he had shoved. Caleb froze, gripping the broom handle like a weapon, his old instincts flaring up. Dutch didn't yell. He just looked at the shattered glass, then at Caleb. He bent down, picking up a large shard of glass with his bare hand. "You missed a spot," Dutch said quietly. It wasn't a taunt. He stood up and looked Caleb in the eye. "Mac didn't keep you here to punish you, kid. He kept you here because he saw something. Don't make him regret it." Dutch tossed the glass into the trash can and walked away. That small interaction shook Caleb more than the shouting. It was a sliver of humanity. He realized then that he wasn't being punished for being weak. He was being broken down so he could be built back up properly. He was at the bottom of the well. He had no status, no name, no respect. He was just the guy cleaning the floor. And strangely, there was a relief in that. He didn't have to pretend to be tough anymore. He just had to sweep. He continued working as the bar slowly emptied out. The conversations grew quieter, more intimate. He heard snippets of stories, men talking about alimony, about arthritis, about the best routes to avoid the interstate troopers. He listened, really listened for the first time. He realized that the brotherhood wasn't about violence. It was about shared struggle. They held each other up because the world tried to knock them down. By 4 a.m. the bar was closed. Only Mac, the bartender, and a few others remained. Caleb had finished cleaning. The bar looked better than it had in years. He stood by the door, holding the mop bucket, waiting for permission to leave. He was exhausted, hungry, and humbled. His ego was dead, left somewhere in the dirty water of the bucket. Mac walked over, inspecting the floor. He ran a finger along the bar counter. It came up clean. He looked at Caleb, who was slumped with fatigue. "Go home," Mac said simply. "Get some sleep." Caleb nodded, turning to grab his vest. "And kid," Mac added, stopping him, "come back tomorrow. The bathroom won't clean itself." It wasn't an invitation to the club. It was a job. But to Caleb, it felt like a lifeline. 3 weeks later, Caleb was a fixture at the Iron Horse. He wasn't a member. He wasn't even a prospect in the official sense. He was just the kid who cleaned the bar, ran errands, and kept his mouth shut. He had traded his pristine leather vest for a simple work shirt. He had stopped polishing his boots. They were now scuffed and dirty from work. The regulars had started to nod at him, not with respect but with acknowledgement. He existed. It was a Friday night, the busiest of the week. The bar was packed. The air was thick with smoke and noise. Caleb was behind the bar, hauling a crate of beer from the cooler when the door slammed open. A group of 3 men walked in. They were loud, drunk, and looking for trouble. They were locals, oil rig workers, looking to blow off steam and prove how tough they were. It was like looking in a mirror at Caleb from 3 weeks ago. One of the men, a bulky guy in a baseball cap, started harassing the bartender, shouting about the price of the beer. He slammed his fist on the counter, spilling a drink on a patron next to him. The tension in the room spiked. The Hells Angels members present started to shift, eyes locking onto the threat. Violence was seconds away. Mac wasn't there yet. He was in the back office. Caleb was closest to the situation. He saw the bulky man pull back his arm, ready to shove the bartender. The old Caleb would have jumped over the bar, thrown a punch, and tried to be the hero. He felt that surge of adrenaline, the desire to smash the guy's face in. But then he heard Mac's voice in his head. "Control saves you." Caleb slammed the crate of beer down on the counter with a loud thud. The sound was sharp enough to cut through the noise. The bulky man turned, surprised. Caleb didn't look angry. He looked bored. He looked calm. He locked eyes with the drunk man. "I'll spill another drop," Caleb said, his voice low and steady. "And you're going to lick it up off the floor, and trust me, I just cleaned it, but you don't want to taste what's down there." It wasn't a shout. It was a statement of fact. Caleb didn't puff out his chest. He just held the man's gaze with a deadpan intensity that he had learned from watching Dutch. He didn't flinch. The drunk man hesitated. He looked at Caleb, then looked around the room and realized he was surrounded by men wearing patches who were all watching the kid behind the bar. The drunk man calculated the odds. The aggression drained out of him. "Just give me a beer," the man mumbled, looking away. Caleb poured the beer calmly, placed it on a coaster, and moved to the next customer. No fight, no blood. He had de-escalated the situation with presence, not violence. He felt a strange sensation in his chest, not the burning high of adrenaline, but the cool, solid weight of confidence. Real confidence. From the doorway of the back office, Mac had watched the whole thing. He stood in the shadows, arms crossed. He didn't say anything. He didn't clap. But as Caleb walked past him to collect empty glasses, Mac gave him a nearly imperceptible nod. It was the loudest approval Caleb had ever received. The sun was rising over the Texas plains, painting the sky in streaks of purple and burnt orange. The humidity had broken, leaving the morning air crisp and cool. Caleb pushed his motorcycle out of the gravel lot. The bike didn't look so shiny anymore. It had a layer of dust on it and a scratch on the tank from where a crate had hit it. It looked better. It looked used. Mac walked out onto the porch of the bar, lighting a cigarette. He watched Caleb strap his helmet on. The dynamic had shifted. Caleb wasn't the scared kid anymore, and he wasn't the arrogant rookie. He was just a young man at the start of a very long, hard road. "You handled yourself well last night," Mac said, the smoke curling around his beard. It was the first direct compliment he had given. "You didn't throw a punch. That's harder than fighting." Caleb looked up, meeting the president's eyes. "I learned from the best," Caleb replied, a small, genuine smile touching his lips. "Don't get cocky," Mac grunted, though there was no malice in it. "You're still a mop boy, but maybe you're not a tourist anymore." Mac flicked the cigarette butt into the gravel. "Be here at 6 p.m. tonight. We've got to run to Austin. You're riding in the back. You keep up, you don't pass anyone, and if you crash, we leave you there. Understood?" Caleb's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't getting a patch. He wasn't a member, but he was being invited to ride, to be part of the pack, even if he was at the tail end. "Understood," Caleb said. He didn't rev his engine this time. He started it up smoothly, feeling the machine rumble beneath him, connecting with it in a way he never had before. Mac turned and went back inside the dark bar. Caleb kicked the kickstand up. He looked at the empty road stretching out toward the horizon. He realized that he had walked into the bar looking for a family to replace the one he lost, trying to force them to love him through fear. He hadn't found a family that would coddle him. He found men who would test him, break him, and force him to build himself into something solid. He pulled out of the parking lot, the gravel crunching under his tires. He didn't speed. He rode steady, his posture relaxed, his eyes scanning the road ahead. The ghost of his father didn't disappear, but it didn't haunt him as much in that moment. He wasn't acting tough anymore. He was just riding. and for the first time in his life, Caleb knew exactly where he was going.